Good evening. My name is Lauren Clark, and I'm the Director of School Counseling here at WA. Welcome to our junior families. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started with tonight's presentation on life after WA. So this presentation will be recorded. The Google Slides, along with the recording itself, will be posted on the website by the end of the week. Following our presentation, we will have a live Q&A with some of our school counselors, so please hold off on your questions until the end, at which point we can post them in the Q&A feature. If you have more specific questions regarding your child, we ask that you reach out to your child's school counselor directly via email. The juniors have already seen a very similar presentation. So last week during our in-school field trip, we actually presented last Thursday to our junior class on life after WA. We then presented on Friday during advisory on the course registration process for their senior year. This presentation has a lot of useful information, but can also be a little bit overwhelming. The counselors are here to guide you and your child throughout this whole process. After tonight's presentation, we'll head into junior planning meetings, which start right after February break. You'll hear a little bit more about those during our presentation tonight. Those meetings are a great opportunity for your child to sit down with their school counselor and have their parent or guardian join them virtually to slow down a bit and discuss the process, answer any questions, and start planning. An email will be sent out with more information on the junior meetings for our students and for our families. As always, please feel free to email your child's counselor with any questions. We're here to help. All right, let's get started with tonight's agenda. So we will review a little bit about the counselor assignments. At this point, the juniors know who their school counselor is, but I'll make sure I share that information. We'll briefly go over the course registration process for senior year. Next year, we are moving into a new software platform, so we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll then go into communication tools, and then the rest of the presentation will be about post-secondary options, so college-specific planning around finding the best and right fit school for each individual student, building the list, application requirements, roles, and next steps. And then, as I stated before, we will end with a Q&A through our chat feature. So this is our school counseling department. We have 8 school counselors and 2 school adjustment counselors. Once again, at this point, our juniors do know who they have for a school counselor, but I wanted to make sure that I had a slide in here about that as well. Okay, the course registration process. So once again, we are moving to a new software platform for next school year, which is PowerSchool. The embedded link here, so you'll be able to access that embedded link once it's posted on the website, goes right to this school counseling page on scheduling of 22-23. Here you'll see the step-by-step guide on scheduling, which goes over all the academic tools that we offer, a time management tool, a course selection sheet, and it actually has the embedded information on PowerSchool and how to go through the course registration process. Below that, we have the programs of study that has all the courses that we offer here at WA, along with the prereqs noted and the course description of each course there. Freshman transition, we don't have to worry about for this group. And then you'll see the course registration tutorial. So we have about an 8-minute video that walks the students through PowerSchool, how to log in, and how to select their courses for next year. So that 8-minute video is really important for students to watch as well. The key dates to remember is that the course selection happens between a 2-week time frame. So it opens on Saturday, February 19th, and it ends on March 4th at 2 p.m. That's when the portal will be open for students. At this point, there's no parent portal. The parent portal will be available to parents and guardians this spring, and we'll share some more information about that in the spring. If the parent portal were open now, you would only have view-only rights. You wouldn't be able to really change around any recommendations or choose electives for students. So we've decided to hold off on that parent portal opening into the spring. There's more information in the step-by-step guide about override request. There's also a parental override process and policy embedded in that step-by-step guide as well. The deadline for override request is March 9th, 2 p.m. The link for that will open. So each override is through a Google form, through the curriculum coordinator. Once again, it's on that parental override process, which is in that step-by-step guide. But that will be open on February 18th at 2 p.m. and it closes on March 9th at 2 p.m. Okay, let's hand it over to Mrs. McLaughlin.
In this process, communication is key. We have several ways that we try to reach students to make sure that they get information in a timely manner. The main way, of course, is through school email. And just know that colleges also still communicate through emails. So students need to make sure that they are checking their email more regularly, and that's becoming a part of their daily habits. We also have a great Instagram account where we do still post major deadlines and things coming up, but it's also a fun, this is what's going on, this is what's happening in the school way of communicating with your students. SCORE is the program that we're using for the college process. It is one that you'll get to know very well, and the students will the next couple of years. And it's also a way that we communicate and send out information to students and parents. So students will be downloading the SCORE app on their phones, and they're going to enable the push notifications. So that way they can also get emails directly on their phone from us, which is a great way for us to reach them. We always have a guidance class Google Classroom so that we can store information. So we can also communicate through students through Google Classroom, and we store the information that we send out. For example, this process that we're doing right now, we'll store that in Google Classroom. So students can go back and refer to things as they need to as the year goes on and the process goes on. The most important communication piece for parents would be the WA counseling newsletter. And you can find that in our WA website on the left-hand side, WA website under guidance on the left-hand side, and register for that. And it's a monthly newsletter, and it's where we make sure that we communicate anything new that's coming up with the college process, any deadlines. And you can also refer back to that historically to see, oh, I have a question about this. What did they say about that? And it's a good place for our information to be stored, and you can look back. This is a picture of the SCORE app. It's pretty cool, and students can do a lot of information, a lot of their college work on it. We don't really find screens to be big enough, but I find that students are doing a lot of work on their phones and manage to do it quite well. So this is a snapshot of the newsletter that we have. And again, it's good. It'll give you a sort of heads up about things that are coming. And again, historical information about things that you might want to refer that have been going on and you had a question about. And lastly, this is a picture of our Instagram page, which we try to also, in addition to having college process academics, we also try to make sure that we focus a lot on wellness in our Instagram, so that we're not just talking about all the pressures and things you have to do, but the ways in which you can keep yourself healthy and happy. And this is just what you're going to be seeing when you log into SCORE. That's what it looks like when you log in. I do recommend that you bookmark it, put it in favorites, whatever you need to do, so that you're not scrambling when you want to look something up, because again, you're going to be using this resource quite a bit the next 2 years.
Good evening. My name is Mrs. DeMagistris, and before we get into more depth about the college planning process, we would like to highlight some other post-secondary options for students for after high school. So, how do students know which option would be best for them, since there's so many options to explore aside from just college? So students can explore their different career interests through volunteer work, educational experiences such as the Junior Job Shadow Program, the Senior Capstone, where they can gain more knowledge about their interests and aptitudes. Students can also take the U Science survey, which is located in SCORE, and Mr. Doherty will talk more about that in a later slide. In the next few slides, I'll cover some of these options in more detail, including taking a gap year, military, technical training programs, and community college. The first option I want to highlight is taking a gap year. So a gap year is sometimes called a time out. It's a dedicated period of time where students can take a break, pursue growth through different experiences. Gap years often involved international travel, volunteer work, and internship experiences. Students can also defer admissions for 1 year typically. So during their senior year, when they're applying to schools, if they get accepted, oftentimes colleges will let them defer up to 1 year, and they can take that time to pursue traveling, work, or spending time in another meaningful way. It's important to be intentional. So students, when they are looking at gap year programs, whether they're informal or more formal, they need to really figure out what they want to do with that time while they're taking that year off. There's a lot of pros with taking a gap year, so gaining new skills, traveling, building their resume. But it's also important for students to, again, plan and budget There are some really awesome gap year programs out there. So really just doing the research, talking with their counselor. There's a website called usgapyearfairs.org, and that's going to have a whole list of different gap year programs that students can look at. The next option is military. So students can enlist, which is entering, the Navy, Army, Air Force, Coast Guard, Marines, or National Guard right away. And all students need to do is have a diploma, and there's some physical requirements, and they also need to take a placement test, which is called the ASVAB. And the ASVAB is an aptitude test. And if interested, students can reach out to Mr. Doherty. There's also the service academies, and these are federal institutions that provide undergraduate education, and they train future commissioned officers to serve in the U.S. Armed Forces. It's a highly competitive and very lengthy process, and students can pay no tuition while they're at the service academy, but they are required to serve in the military upon graduation. There's also the ROTC, which is the Reserve Officers Training Corps, which is a college military program. A lot of schools offer an ROTC program. It just depends on which college has these programs. So I recommend if students are interested to research and see which ones do offer it. The application process would take place alongside the student's application to college. And it does not involve as many layers as if a student were to apply to like a service academy, but applicants still must pass like a physical exam. And both the ROTC training and service academy programs, they both yield the same result. Students would graduate as a commissioned officer. The next option I want to highlight are vocational training programs. So many students have a strong interest in lots of different things, right? So if a student has a strong interest in a particular occupation, or if they want to start working right away, then this could be a good option for them. So in these situations, job training programs, they can last for a few weeks or a couple of years, and the careers could range from cosmetology to computer technician programs to vet assistants to culinary arts. There's also an apprenticeship program, and these are opportunities for students to experience on-the-job training while also attending school and getting paid. These are intensive programs. They're often focused on training individuals for careers such as electrician, plumbing, painting, bricklaying, auto mechanics, welders, and other hands-on skill-based jobs. And these programs can often last from 1 to 4 years in length, and they involve working full-time with an experienced journeyman while attending classes. And the last option I want to highlight before we get into the college planning process is community college. So community college are 2-year colleges that offer associate degrees. They can be public or private, and the admissions process is pretty straightforward. It's much more simple than applying to a 4-year school. Oftentimes, there's just one application, and a student would fill that out, and then they would work with an advisor to pick classes. An associate's degree is typically a minimum requirement for some jobs, which can prepare students for a career in 2 years. And then after those 2 years, students can decide either to stop and go right into the workforce, or they can continue on to get their 4-year degree and transfer on to a undergrad college or university. There's a program I do want to highlight. It's called the Mass Transfer Program. It's a wonderful program. It's a collaboration between community colleges and the state universities and the UMass schools. And it's a cost savings transfer pathway program. So students can attend a community college for 2 years and then transfer on to one of the state universities or UMass schools for the next 2 years, and they'll graduate with a bachelor's degree, and they can save up to 40% of the total cost.
Excuse me, my name is Brian Doherty, one of the guidance counselors here at WA, and we're going to do the college deep dive. So on the next slides ahead, we're going to cover some pertinent information for juniors going forward, and we'll get into more specifics. But just to cover the general topics, determining college fit, there are many components and details of that definition, and we'll cover that in more detail in our slides and also in our meetings. Making the list is a really essential part of the process. It really sets up college visits in the spring and fall and it really drives the process because students start to get an idea where they're applying and eventually dates and deadlines. So it really kind of sets up the train on the admissions journey. We'll cover application components. There's everything from the common application called the Common App you might have heard of, to the Coalition, to this student reported academic record called SAR. So we'll cover that in detail. We'll also address the college admissions trends. We know that more schools are going test optional and less emphasis on standardized testing and some other next steps. Determining areas of interest. So trying to figure out what you want to major in can take time. So we have something with SCORE called U Science, which is a really comprehensive assessment that really taps into a student's talents and potential. It's about a 40 or 45-minute assessment in SCORE called U Science that we recommend all students take. It can reinforce what they're thinking about for a major or career path already, or illuminate something they have not thought of before. So what it does, it gives a snapshot in detail after you take the assessment. It will give you some pertinent information that might help set up course selections, tapping into skills that you're aware of or not aware of, or eliminating some skills or talents that you already know that wouldn't be beneficial for you in terms of choosing a major. So we recommend taking the U Science. If there's any questions after that, students can come see their counselor for more debriefing, and we want to just eliminate that that support that we offer. So finding the best fit college, as we said before, there's many components with regards to this. There's no best college, right? There's different components that are essential for every student, and some of those are pretty straightforward. So to start off, we'll ask in our meetings in terms of size. So I always like to use Westford Academy as context. It's about 1,600, 1,700 kids. That's a medium large high school, but very small for a college. So using WA as a context really can set up if you want a larger school or something similar to WA. So using that context for WA is a good starting point. The other component is location. Students may or may not be aware of what location or setting is best for them. So we'll cover some anecdotes and examples of different locations. So urban, obviously you think of city, Northeastern as an example that's local. Suburban schools, which would be, as an example, Merrimack College up the road here in 495. Some students may prefer a college town like UMass Amherst, or more of a rural setting like Franklin Pierce in New Hampshire. So we'll go over that. And part of that is that students may need to see a variety of schools to get a sense of that feel we kind of use here at the department. Other things to consider: programs. Do they offer the program? Some are more niche-y than others. Also, we talk about as a department in meetings, if you're unsure, you're thinking of a couple of majors, is the transfer to other majors an easy path? That's something that we can help in that. Do they have my major? Pretty simple and straightforward. Academic supports. Most colleges will offer general support for their students, but others offer more substantial support, especially for students that are coming off a 504 IEP. Cost and financial aid, obviously a critical component of the process. I think that there are a lot of schools have net cost calculators on their website, and to get a sense of what colleges offer in terms of average financial aid and the differences between loans, work study, those are important components. And then lastly, extracurricular activities, student life, and athletics. Things that you've done here at WA, are those schools offering those? Do you want to go to a big Division I athletic school to see games? So these components all mix together to try to create a puzzle that creates the best list, or list that's more appropriate for your student. So this is the bell curve that we use as kind of a visual and also kind of a good, I would say, strategy. So if you see here at the top of the curve are what we call target schools. And when students put their list together, which I just mentioned earlier, we obviously recommend students to create a list that has most of the schools in the target range. So that means that their academic record matches the admissions averages for that college or university. So it makes sense to have most of the colleges in the target range for each student. And to your left and right, there are two other terms, comfortable and reach. So Students should also add a couple of comfortable schools where they're clearly above the averages for based on their academic record. And that's a potential for scholarships, for honors college. So you want to have students apply to a couple of comfortable schools and then reach schools where it doesn't mean the student wouldn't do well. It's just that their admissions averages for those schools are a bit higher than the academic record. And then kind of in between these categories are what we call 50-50 or tweeners. And there might be some instances where a student's really straddling both categories. And I see a trend where students are adding a couple of these just to fulfill their college list. So again, just to re-emphasize that the bulk of the schools should be what we call target schools. So we'll address that in our meetings. Application plans, there's different ways to apply. And we'll go over this just kind of briefly and more in detail in our senior meetings. So there's regular decision. So regular decision has been around forever. And that entails deadlines starting in January up and through March. And the difference here is that it gives more students more time to get their applications ready and complete. And it also allows for more senior grades to be evaluated. So when a student applies regular decision, colleges are going to get Q1 grades and then an overall semester 1 grade when we send what we call mid-year reports. So that's what encompasses the regular decision. So there's pros and cons to it, but the pro is more time. And if you're trending as a student, more senior grades to evaluate. And you hear a decision usually in April, late March, April. Early action is a very, very popular platform for our students. I think 80% of our seniors apply early action every year. And that means you apply by November 1st or November 15th. The colleges only get Q1 grades. So if we go back to that target category, if you're already in that range, I can see why kids would go early action. You apply in November, and in most cases, hear back in mid-December with a decision. Restrictive single choice early action, no need to really address that. There's only a handful of schools that offer that, so we'll just kind of move on from there. Early decision 1 and 2 is the binding applications platform, and that means that students apply early decision 1 or 2. So ED, you'll hear that term, is similar to EA in the sense that you have a November 1st or 15th deadline, and you usually hear back from a college mid-December. But the difference is that you have to, as students, parents, and counselors sign a contract saying, if admitted to that college or university, you will be attending. So it's a really serious decision to make, and something that we collaborate on with regards to ED. So we can go over that in more detail in our meeting. So the early decision is binding versus non-binding with the early action. And then some schools offer ED2, which is going to be that January deadline, still the binding component of it as well. So the early decision really should be, if students do that, it should be clearly their top choice with no deviation, no doubt in terms of how it relates to other schools. And then rolling admissions is no deadline. So what happens is colleges, as they get completed applications, they make decisions after reviewing them when they come in. So you, in most cases, looking at a 6 to 8 week turnaround, kind of similar to early action. They just don't wait for a specific date. So UPitt, Quinnipiac are some examples of that. And again, they only get Q1 grades. So when you see the word rolling, that means as they get completed applications, they're making a decision.
I'm Mrs. Burnkrant, and good evening. I'm going to talk about the actual college application components. So there are a couple different pieces that I'm going to mention, and we will also revisit these in your junior meeting and your senior meeting. So most colleges are on the Common Application, which, as Mr. Doherty said, commonapp.org is where you would find that. You fill it out once and you submit it to different colleges. If a school is not on the Common App, then they have an application either through their college website or through the coalition application. Another part of your application is letters of recommendation. So at this time, most colleges only require 1 teacher letter of recommendation, with a small number requiring 2. So in the junior meeting, we'll talk about where you might want to go with this information, what teacher you might want to ask. And then if any of your colleges require 2, we have a separate process for that. In addition to the actual application and the letters of recommendation, your school counselor will send your transcript a lot of colleges are moving towards the SAR, which is a student reported academic record, where you will need a copy of your transcript and you actually fill in your grades for the colleges. Colleges are moving towards this as a way to expedite the review process. And then as with COVID over the last 2 years, we have seen colleges move towards test optional admissions, which is great in terms of if a student's not a great standardized test taker, then they're able to apply to different schools without their test scores. So this is a screenshot of the Common Application where you will be able to, you can see there's different tabs at the top that will show you where to add the colleges and a dashboard and the actual application to fill out. In terms of letters of recommendation, as I mentioned, you will ask one teacher for a letter of recommendation. That can either be in person or through email, but we will be giving you a paper form that the teacher needs to sign. So we strongly encourage you to have these face-to-face conversations with the teacher that you are asking. We will give out some tips and tricks about how this conversation should be carried out. Counselors write a letter for every student applying to a four-year college. There are 8 counselors for approximately 441 students, and we think around 80% of the senior class applies early action by November 1st. So what this means is that we are strongly encouraging students to reach out to their counselors early in their senior year, set up meetings early so that we can get these letters done. The more time we have, the better our letters are. And then in terms of other letters of recommendation, whether it's a coach, an advisor, an employer, et cetera, it's not required at all by colleges. And this is a very case-by-case basis where you will talk to your school counselor about whether an additional letter of recommendation would be necessary. This is what our WA transcript looks like. As you can see on it, we only include the final averages for each year. One thing to note is that we will be sending 2 transcripts for the student's initial packet. This is because during the COVID year, these students were freshmen. And so we will send one transcript with the freshman mid-year grades, and then the next transcript will have the CR as the final average, and then the sophomore and junior year final grades on it. The initial transcript will also have the senior year classes on it. GPA is at the top right. So standardized testing. There are 2 major standardized tests, the SAT and ACT, administered by 2 different companies, graded on different scales. And you can review this chart just to see what the differences are. One thing that as I mentioned, is that test and optional admissions has become very, very popular. At least 70% of colleges and universities don't require the testing. There's a website called www.fairtest.org where all the colleges that are test optional are listed. One thing to note with test optional schools is that some of them require additional information in lieu of test scores. So that can be a portfolio, a writing sample, additional supplemental essays. This is just a slide to note admissions trend over the past few years. This is the class of 2021. If we were to look at this data, looking back at 2019, 20, and 21, we've seen definitely an increase in the average GPA and the average test scores, although all 3 of these at this time are test optional. One thing also to note is that there are 4 very competitive majors: nursing, business, computer science, and engineering, especially at UMass Amherst. And this year, psychology was also added to that very competitive major list. So these are just things to note as you're talking to your school counselor about your list.
Hi, I'm Heidi Heider, one of the counselors in the department, and I'm going to spend a few minutes and talk about the role that the student, parent, and counselor all play in this, what is probably seeming like an overwhelming process. So really the key to this whole process from start to finish is collaboration and communication, as Tracy talked about earlier. You can see from this slide here that the student is the central focus of this process, and all of the communication we have and all of the discussions we have should really keep the student in the center of the process. So the student, what does a student do throughout this process? This isn't an exhaustive list, but this will give you an idea of what responsibilities are part of the student's list. So the student will utilize the college search option in SCORE and add colleges to the following section. Parents can suggest colleges in SCORE, but it really is the student who needs to add schools to the following list. And then as we get farther in the process, to the applying and applied list, because the student really needs to take ownership of this process. The student needs to research specific application requirements for each college, including standardized testing requirements, whether a portfolio or something similar is required, also requirements specific to recommendations and things of that nature. The best, most accurate way for students to research this information is on each college's website. The student should be communicating with colleges. If your student wants to schedule an information session or a visit, or eventually an interview or something of that nature, the student should really be taking the reins on this college process. You know, either scheduling online, or if there's questions and eventually the student needs to call admissions office, that should be happening from the student. There will be a list of specific tasks we need juniors to do before scheduling a junior meeting. And we will check to make sure all of those things are done so that that meeting can really be productive. And then the student can schedule the junior meeting, and we have a very seamless procedure that students can use to do that. And then lastly, just a reminder about the youth science report, filling out that survey, and then reviewing that to help as students look at potential majors and then start developing an initial college list. The counselor. These are the main roles and responsibilities of the counselor. We will provide feedback on the college list, both during the initial junior meeting and then also when we meet individually with seniors in the fall. We will have that meeting this winter or spring with juniors and a parent or guardian, or parents or guardians. We give a pretty detailed agenda, resources, we explain the process, and we answer any questions you have, not just during the junior meeting, but throughout the process. I think it's really important for families to understand that, the junior meeting is our kind of big kickoff to this process, but we're here throughout. We're not going to leave anyone hanging. You're welcome to email when you have questions or concerns. We're really here to support you through this whole process. We will share resources to help and support, both through the Counseling Google Classroom, through the newsletters. We're always going to give you things that we think will help as you continue out throughout this process. And then the last and one of the important pieces is we write the counselor statement during the fall of senior year. We do have some things that we request of students to help us really put forth the best product we can, and we welcome parent input, and we can talk about that in a minute. So the parent or guardian's role. We know that this can be challenging, and just remember that we are here to help you throughout. We do have an optional junior parent questionnaire that's available in SCORE. We welcome your input. It's certainly not required, but it is very, very useful because sometimes parents can highlight things that we wouldn't know or that maybe students wouldn't think to mention. We do request that that be completed by September 5th, primarily for the reason that due to so many students applying early, we really need to start writing as soon as we can in the fall. Your biggest role is to support and encourage. This is stressful for students, probably one of the biggest stressors they've ever experienced so far. And so just being there, offering help when needed is always your best bet. The next one, have an open and honest discussion about finances. The cost of college is rising exponentially. And so sometimes families really do need to have a discussion about what's reasonable, what's feasible. Talk about if a student is going to be paying for, some or all of this experience. Really look at student loans and what that would look like in the repayment section. It can be a hard conversation, but it really can help the process as you continue and as a student finally sits down and makes choices. We talked about this a little bit. Let your student take ownership. Email college admissions offices. Call with questions. Colleges want to hear from students. And admissions officers tell us this repeatedly. It really sends a good message if students take ownership of the process. And then the last piece is prepare your student for disappointment. A lot of students, if they hear no from a college, which most students do, it's their first big disappointment for some of these students. And we want to make sure that we reassure students that things will work out, that it's okay, and that their family and their counselor will be here to help them, get through any disappointments or bumps in the road.
Good evening. I'm Karen Halloran, school counselor. And SCORE is a customized, secure website that supports post-secondary, college, and career planning. You may ask, what does SCORE mean? Well, SCORE is an Irish Gaelic verb that means to exit, retire, or transition from one phase to another. This software does just that. It supports students to plan their transition to life after WA. SCORE allows students to search, explore, and organize colleges. It's very user-friendly, and there are quick and helpful tutorials in the support section. Students can search for colleges via the student dashboard, or they can conduct an advanced search by entering criteria such as an academic focus, distance or location, number of undergrad students, personal interests or activities, athletics, test scores, acceptance rates, campus settings, and ROTC. So at a quick glance, the overview page allows students and parents to explore general admission criteria, academic majors, cost and aid, and student life information for each college. Students can add a college to their following list from this page too. There's also a direct link to the college's website. And once on the college's website, students can click on the admissions tab and register for that particular college's information session and tour. An in-person college visit is one of the most critical and important steps of the college process. So a scattergram is one of the most valuable tools in SCORE. It visually depicts historical admission decisions using previous Westford Academy students' GPAs and SAT or ACT scores from the last several years. Scattergrams are most relevant because typically colleges will review applicants within the context of the high school that they attend. The scattergrams use only two data points, the student's GPA and the test scores. And if a student doesn't have any test scores, then we can look at the graph knowing that the student falls somewhere on their GPA line. These graphs are intended to provide a guidepost to gauge acceptance likelihood, and they are not intended to be a definitive predictor of admission. Please also note that the scattergrams don't account for major-specific data, where some majors such as engineering, computer science, and nursing may be much more competitive. Now, the green circles on the graph indicate accepted students from Westford Academy over the last few years. The red triangles depict denied students from WA. The blue circle means the student was waitlisted, and the yellow circle means the student was deferred and the college is most likely waiting to receive mid-year grades. So if the student is surrounded by red triangles, that means this school is most likely a reach school. And if the student is surrounded by green circles and near the top right, then this school is most likely a target school. We can go to the next slide. At this time in the process, juniors should be focused on adding colleges to the column named Following. This is a fluid list that allows students to add and remove colleges as they continue their search. A good starting place would be to review the results and suggested colleges from the Youth Science Career Survey that we asked our juniors to complete last year during advisory and Mr. Doherty just talked about. Students can find those results in their score account. The more accurate that the following list is, the better your counselor can understand what types of colleges that the student is trending toward. And parents with active score accounts and counselors can add colleges into the suggested column for students to review. Counselors will also make a recommendation if we see a need for comfortable schools, as the goal is to have a balanced list. We'll also suggest additional schools that might be strong options. If a student is interested in the suggested college, they can drag it to the column named following, and if they're not interested, that's okay too. There's a column to the left named not interested. During senior year, students will also need to drag their colleges into the applying column and applied columns. When clicking on any particular college's tile, students will be able to see the scattergrams. And when clicking on the 3 dots next to each college's name, the students can go directly to the college's overview page as well. Okay. We'd like to introduce the topic of financial aid at this point, and we strongly encourage every junior to have a financial conversation with their family so that they can have a clear and realistic picture of how much money is available to the student versus loans and debt. We'd like to avoid the student having any surprises at the end of this process. Now, every college's website has a net price calculator and sometimes a loan calculator. And these tools can be semi-helpful because they don't always depict the complete financial picture. The FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. And after October 1st of senior year, we encourage every senior to complete the FAFSA for 2 reasons. If anything should happen to the family's financial circumstances throughout the senior's year, then you can go back to ask the college directly to re-review the financial aid package. And oftentimes, the college will require the FAFSA in order to award merit money. In addition, the MCAS scholarships, which are the Koplik and Adams scholarships for the UMass system, they require the FAFSA as well. Bottom line is, once a student finalizes their list of colleges to apply to, we encourage you to check the financial aid websites of each college's website for deadlines and specific information. Some private colleges also require the CSS profile in addition to the FAFSA, and it's a deeper dive into the family resources. This fall, we'll offer a college financing webinar that will be hosted by MIFA.org, and that stands for the Massachusetts Educational Financing Authority, and their website offers a lot of information as well. It's very useful.
What's next? I'm Susan Lynch, and I'm the final counselor you'll hear from in this presentation, I promise. I know we've given you a lot of information, but we're going to talk about tangible next steps to continue moving your family along in this process. So we've talked about the junior parent questionnaire. It's going to be available in SCORE through September 5th. And like Mrs. Heider said, we do ask that you complete this by the 5th because we do write a lot of our letters in a very quick turnaround time in the fall. And this information is very valuable for us. I know personally, I love the junior parent questionnaire. I've learned so much about students' relationships with their siblings or grandparents or interesting hobbies or, things that they do outside of school that, even though some things might be on their resume, we'll see their resume. We don't need to hear that from you as parents. We need to hear about the things that we don't see that can be incredibly helpful for us in making your student more three-dimensional in this essay that we write for them. So we'll ask about interests and hobbies, relationships with, family members or neighbors. We're asking you to describe 1 or 2 events that you feel were pivotal for them in their journey through high school. So as parents, this is a great way to kind of brag about your child and tell us about them in a way that we can incorporate it into our counselor statement. So we've all talked about these wonderfully famous junior meetings that we do, and we appreciate that each and every child's meeting will be different. So we want to meet with every junior, regardless of your after WA plans. A lot of this presentation was geared towards 4-year colleges, but we will meet with every single junior to talk about what each child's plan is for life after high school. So please know that every child will meet with their counselor, with a parent or guardian. because everything is important to us when meeting with them to hear about what's next for each student. So before we will schedule that meeting, before we'll move forward with scheduling the meeting with your child, we need them to register for SCORE, submit the junior questionnaire, and that helps us kind of steer the meeting in a way. We've given you a ton of information tonight that's very general, but we want to tailor that meeting to your student. So the junior questionnaire helps us kind of focus in on what's important for your student in this meeting. We're going to ask them to complete activities and achievements, otherwise known also as a resume, if that works out too. We want to know what they're doing and what they've done. And then a couple of the optional things that they can do before they meet with us. We have the U-Science report that Mr. Doherty talked about earlier. And they can also save a college search. So if they've done a college search in SCORE, for example, based on nursing schools within 50 miles of Westford, and they've saved that, we're happy to review that search with them in the meeting as well. So this famous junior meeting for scheduling, we're going to make sure that the student completes that student to-do list, and we do verify that they've done all of that. You know, we're not trying to be crazy gatekeepers, but if that information isn't ready for us, we really can't tailor that meeting. And this makes the most productive meeting possible for all parties involved. So we will ensure that they've done all of those items on the checklist before we allow the student to meet with us. The students will use each counselor's individual You Can Book Me link to schedule. So it may be helpful when your student is done and ready to schedule that meeting, perhaps you can sit down one night after dinner and look at the calendar that the counselor has online, translated with the block schedule here. So if it's easier for your child to miss certain classes than others, they can translate the calendar to our block time, and then perhaps your personal calendar. So I'm sure all counselors always have a great way of finding a balance for everybody. And we'll make sure that your child books it through the You Can Book Me. It's important to know that the student must book that and not the parent. And then we'll invite the parents in by Google Meet. So we will send you, once we've confirmed a time for everybody, we'll send the parents a Google Meet invite to join the meeting while the child and your student is in the classroom, the child is in the office with us. We'll have you join in from a Google Meet. So what to expect during these junior meetings? We're going to review each student's individual transcript. We're going to look at your prospective college list and provide some feedback. We understand right now, Mrs. Halloran said it perfectly, the student's list is fluid. So that following column might have 40 or 50 schools on it right now, and that's totally fine. And schools will leave and come back and go forth, and all of that is to be expected. But we'll look at that list and just give you some feedback. Sometimes we'll say, oh, you know, it seems like you have a lot of comfortable schools. Have you thought of any reaches? Or the flip side, this is a very reach-heavy list. Have we considered maybe any targets or comfortable schools? We'll give you some insight on that. We'll talk about standardized tests and how that kind of applies to your student. We'll look at some additional resources. We may have some ideas based on, you know, students we've advised in the past, or some recommendations we have based on what your student is looking for. We'll also walk through the next steps and talk about what can be done over the next few months and over the summer to make things easier. Like Mrs. Hyder said before, we are always here for questions. We know this presentation is a lot. We'll answer some of those questions in this junior meeting as well, and also questions that are specific to your students. We truly believe that college is a match to be made and not a prize to be won. We all have this featured in our offices. Enjoy the process. There might be times that it feels a little bit overwhelming. We are here to help and are happy to have those conversations with you and your student in determining what's going to be the best fit for them when they leave Westford Academy.
That meeting.
It's important to note there that we always have our senior meetings in the fall as well. So even if a student's in the dual enrollment program, we're still going to make the time to meet with those students, even if they're not in the building.
Perfect. Okay, I do not see where the junior parent questionnaire is on SCORE. Could you please tell us where that is on SCORE parent page? As a side note, if anybody is not if any parent is not registered for SCORE, we just re-invited all parents who are not registered yesterday. That email invitation that's in your email box will last for 72 hours. We can always re-invite you again, but do go ahead and click on that and register for SCORE if you received that email. The SCORE parent survey is under surveys on the left-hand side. I think we've enabled that already, haven't we, Lauren?
I think so, but
Okay.
I'll check after the presentation to make sure that's enabled.
Okay. All right. As for the college list, I am thinking about 10 colleges, 1 to 2 safety, 6 to 7 target, and 1 to 2 reach. Does that sound about right?
I do think that sounds about right. That's around average. You want, when I mentioned that bell curve where we want the bulk of the colleges to be target, I can see in that question, the higher number is in that category. And that's exactly what you want. That's such a sound strategy. And then you a couple on the left and right of that bell curve, safety, we call comfortable schools, 1 or 2, we say maybe suggest 2, and then 2 on the reach side. So that delineation that you put down is a good number for colleges because you're covering all categories. Yep.
Okay. How do we apply for scholarships to organizations, to various organizations? I can take that question. You go ahead and apply. It's usually senior year. We usually recommend that students concentrate on applying to colleges first and get that step 1 done. And then when it's time to apply to colleges for various organizations, go right ahead and do that as long as it's by the deadline. On our WA website, we have an outside scholarship listing that we keep up to date. You can see the criteria for that. We're about to launch for our seniors at the end of this week, the WA trustees and community scholarship applications. That doesn't happen until February, March of senior year. So only seniors can graduating seniors can apply for those. So that will all happen senior year. And we'll talk a little bit more about that senior year, but there's a lot of Google searches you can do you can put out there for scholarships. Is there an advantage to taking or not taking a standardized test?
I mean, with the trend of test optional, advantage or not taking, I mean, I think it's with 70% of schools being test optional. I think it's a good thing to take them and see what happens. I think I use the word strategize with students, and we all do this, I'm sure, in our role as counselors, is for students to have that data and then use it strategically in terms of where they're applying. There might be instances where, based on the score, you send to some schools and not to others. So I think having the information handy is so helpful, and then work with your guidance counselor in terms of how you would strategize on that.
Here's another question regarding that same topic. When schools say test optional, do they really mean it? Will students need to come up with a good reason why they did not take the standardized test? I've heard some concern being expressed by folks.
100%. There's nothing punitive about it. When they mean test optional, they mean test optional. There's nothing punitive. It's not going to be held against the applicant. What the trend is, and we talked about it before, 70% being test optional as we stand now, that just reiterates the importance of the academic record. So I go back to that win-win in terms of, in some instances, last year, for example, some kids would send to certain schools, not to the other. But when schools mean test optional, they mean test optional is not going to be any detriment or anything punitive to the student. So that's 100% accurate. When they say it, they mean it.
Thank you. Okay, the sample GPA on the transcript in the slides, are they weighted or unweighted? And how do you convert from weighted to unweighted? WA calculates only a weighted GPA. So the transcript sample in the slide was a weighted GPA. We do not convert from weighted to unweighted. And when you apply to colleges may recalculate your GPA according to their own formula, but that's different among every college. Okay, and this is the slide deck. Will it be shared to review again? There were a few website links and other information provided there. Yes, we will share the we'll share the presentation on the website. Will we share the actual slide deck too?
Yeah, so I'm going to post both by the end of the week. I'll post the whole slide deck and then the recording as well.
Okay. Do highly competitive colleges look down on an initial year of community college?
No, I mean, if you did a year at community college, you'd be a transfer student, but think about it, it's apples to apples. You're taking courses at the college level. So if you're proving yourself in that, besides the curriculum we offer here, obviously, but in that scenario where a student goes to a year of community college and they're doing well, it's that apples to apples scenario where they're doing, being successful in college level courses. It would be a transfer process, but no, there would be nothing, again, punitive on that. It's really showcasing that you can do the work.
If a student information and score is wrong, how do you edit or correct it? If it's a demographic information and the student can edit it, please go right ahead and edit it. And if not, please contact your counselor and they can have it corrected. How does dual enrollment work senior year with the rotating schedule at WA, and how do they fit it in? Well, that's one of the reasons we recommend that you either do all dual enrollment or all WA. Because of our rotating schedule, it's very difficult to fit in dual enrollment courses. The student would have to take them outside of the school hours here. But that is something that you can talk about with your individual counselor. Which colleges have subjects biochem or biomedical in Massachusetts? You can actually search for that in SCORE by doing an advanced college search and putting in those majors. Okay. Is community service volunteerism still a primary criteria that colleges and universities considered for admission? Given that the pandemic has this criteria, has it been relaxed?
I think 100%. And prior to the pandemic, community service, which is a great thing to do, wasn't the path a student had to take. It could be work, it could be athletics, it could be music. Colleges want to see where you have duration, depth, passion, maybe some leadership. I remember, I think it was Bentley. I remember a gentleman telling me about a student that was washing dishes for 3 summers in a row, and he still remembered it 5 years later. But in terms of accessing ECs, extracurricular activities, colleges for sure have a context based on the pandemic that students haven't been able to always fulfill those passion and interests. So they understand that in context for sure.
Which do you recommend, ED, EA, or normal process? That's a really customized answer for your student. So I think that's what will be discussed in the junior parent meeting so that individual answer can be answered. And it also depends on different colleges. It's not a cut and dry across the board answer for one student. That student can be applying to all 3 different applications deadlines, depending on what the college is, if they're reach realistic or comfortable. Is there an advantage to taking an AP class, even if it's AP art or something along those lines?
It's situational. It's hard to say. I mean, it's been depends on the student. It's not required. I mean, it really depends situational on the student. So I think that'd be more of a one-on-one with your counselor.
It's also about whether or not the student would be recommended for that course or is ready to take that course as well. Can't just pick AP courses out of our hat and say we need to take some. That the student has to be ready to take it. Mm-hmm. With rolling admissions, when is the earliest that students can apply? So this really basically, in my opinion, it matters whether or not the senior wants the college to receive their first quarter grades or not. So first quarter grades usually come out after November 15th at WA. So the student can apply at any point in time in the fall, but if they want us to wait and send their transcript with their first quarter grades on it, then we'll do that. And if they want us to send their transcript without first quarter grades, that's fine too. So I think that would be an individual conversation with your counselor in the junior parent meeting as well.
Yep.
Okay. Does the Common App have a standard college essay or topic? And do most colleges have an essay requirement with the application?
Yes. So the Common App has 7 questions. 6 are specific in nature. Number 7 is an open-ender. So the Common App, which you'll hear often in the weeks and months ahead, the schools that are affiliated with the Common App have a common application that all students need to answer. And then some schools do have additional writing supplements, and you'll see those under My Colleges in the Common App. But yep, generally speaking, it's called the Common App essay, and we give feedback and brainstorm with students on that.
Okay. If a student is taking courses outside of Westford Academy, how do they highlight in their application? Well, if they're taking dual enrollment courses through MCC, that goes on their transcript, and they would answer that question in the Common App as well. And for any other type of courses that could go in their resume, it depends what that course is. But I'm sure that your counselor can help you answer that question based on the student and what courses you're talking about. Okay. Is early decision beneficial for financial aid?
No, it's a moot point. I mean, in the past, there's been some talk about, because it's a binding decision, can colleges, universities kind of be frugal with their financial aid packages? And that's always out there. And talking to admissions folks and others, that it's really not the case in most cases. Going ED really, as Ms. Halloran said, is a conversation with the counselor, but it's really, and kind of an overview, it's you're doing that because it's clearly the one. It's separated from the rest of your colleges. And it's clearly separated in a lot of ways. So financial aid won't be a factor in that regard. It's just more of talking to your counselor and really, are you really committing to that college or university? And it's a big decision because there's a contract that has to be signed as well.
Okay. How about taking an AP test for a course not offered at WA? Is there any benefit?
Being one of the AP coordinators, it really isn't. I mean, you can self-study, and if we don't offer it, I know there's a couple of students, or probably a few, that went outside, and it's been tough with COVID to find locations that would accept students. The only advantage would be, I guess, would be kind of on the back end of the process is if depending on where the student enrolls, what's the AP credit policy for that college or university. And based on certain scores, there might be the ability to circumvent an introduction class. But in terms of the AP scores, generally speaking, they're just not part of the admissions process, nor are they required. They're great in the classes. So the only benefit would be on the back end of the process if a college would accept that AP credit.
Can we create a Common App account now so we can see what the supplemental essays are and work on them over the summer? So the issue with that is that over the summer, colleges change their supplemental essays from year to year. So we tell students after August 1st, you can go in and create your account and work on the Common App. That's when Common App rolls it over to the next senior year class. And that's when updated supplemental essay questions will be in there. Working toward National Honor Society or enhancing one's extracurriculars and life experiences does one weigh more towards college acceptances?
Nope. It really comes back to, I talked before about community service or NHS. They're all great, but the colleges are really looking for, where did you have your passion? Where did you have your interest, maybe leadership? And that is delineated on the Common App too. They ask how many years you've been doing and whatnot. So there's no perfect formula. It's just they like to see that passion, the authenticity that students pursue, and it doesn't have to be path X, Y, or Z.
One more question. I have an account in SCORE, but do not see my current junior listed. Does WA guidance address that, or does my student? So you need to be affiliated to Westford Academy SCORE, and the only way you can do that is if we invite you. You can't just go and create your own SCORE account. So like I said, make sure your counselor has your accurate email address. They'll put you into your student's SCORE account and then send you an invite to be linked to that. So that you can't just go and create a SCORE account. It won't be linked with us. Okay. When will parents have access to Power School like iParent to see schedule and grades?
So access to parents will happen in the spring for Power School. The only thing that is available in Power School this school year is the course registration process. So we're utilizing iPass for the remaining portion of this school year for grades, for attendance, for everything besides the course registration process. In the spring, parents will receive information on how to log into Power School, and they will have view rights only, which means they'd be able to see a student's schedule by the end of the school year, but that's it for this school year. Next school year, they'll be able to see grades at the quarter mark or attendance schedules.
I don't have any more questions.
You did great. We wanted to thank all the junior families, the parents, the guardians that took the time out of their night to attend the webinar. Thank you to Mr. Doherty and Ms. Halloran for helping with the questions tonight. Once again, the slide deck and the recording of the presentation will be posted by the end of this week. And please reach out to your child's school counselor if you have any further questions after tonight. Thank you so much. Have a good night.